Hey everyone, my name is Kaya if you're new here. If you're not, welcome back. I make intentional living content. So lately I've been sharing my birth stories. I shared my birth story with my first daughter last week. So if you haven't watched that, that's a great one to go back and watch. But today I will be sharing the birth story of my second daughter. I would also just love if you are interested in this kind of content, if you would subscribe to my channel. I will be putting out a lot more videos just about mothering and all these kinds of things. So let's jump into my birth story. To start, to say that this birth revealed the goodness of God would be an understatement. To give a little backstory about the pregnancy, not to take up too much time, this pregnancy felt a lot harder than my first. I was pretty nauseous and sick during the first trimester. That did happen both times. This time, though, I dealt with a lot of fear in my pregnancy. I was just very worried about her health. The fear was kind of unfounded. So I really had, as I started getting towards the middle and end of my pregnancy, had really started praying a lot and journaling because it had started to kind of go into my birth. As I was preparing for my birth emotionally and mentally, it felt like it was starting to get into there. And this time around, I did a home birth. If you listen to my first birth story, I did a birth center birth with my first. This time we chose home birth, which I could talk about a little bit of the differences between those two a different time. But yeah, I was very excited to do a home birth. I had the best midwife this time. It was just that underlying fear that was sneaking into my pregnancy and kind of just taking away and stealing this joy that I have during pregnancy. So fast forward to all of the prayers I was praying for the birth. I was also doing a lot of reflecting on my past birth, which I, again, talked about in the last video a little bit, that I had processed through a lot of it. Long story short, during that birth, though it went great, I did feel like I had a loss of autonomy, and that had led to some of the slowness I felt like in labor. It was also a very exhausting birth. I was super active, trying lots of positions. It kind of felt like I was doing a marathon, literally, because I was doing so many different positions and exercises and working out for hours and hours on end. So this time, as I prepared for this birth, I had been very specific about my prayers. Listening to other podcasts and birth stories, I had heard how specific women had gotten in just their prayers and desires to God for their birth. And that encouraged me to make specific desires known to God and just giving them to Him, whether He wanted to do that or not. So I'm just going to read you this. I wrote this about 2 months before I had the birth. I said, Yahweh, I bring all these desires to you, asking for your will in my labor and birth to play out, but also dreaming about things I would love and enjoy. Some of the physical things were a shorter labor, less than 12 hours ideally, getting to stay at home with no transfer before or after the birth, my daughter being born healthy and strong, the midwife arriving just before I start pushing. I wanted her to be born in June, full term, of course. That one, so little side story too, my midwife had kind of had a little mix up in her schedule. She was supposed to travel during my due date time frame, and it was before the 42 weeks. If you remember too from my last video, I went 8 days overdue with my daughter, and so I was expecting to go after my due date, which would have put us right in the time frame that she was going to be gone, which would have meant that I had to have a different midwife that I did get to meet once and might have been okay, but I had been working with this midwife I loved and I really wanted her at my birth. The other things I listed were her being in a good position, labor starting at evening/night, and her being born early morning. And I also prayed for it to be pain-free, waves that are manageable all throughout, with breathing and relaxation, smooth, beautiful pushing process. And then also my water breaking right before I push. Water birth was my desire with my first. Even though it was again a birth center birth, we actually did end up having her like using a birth stool. And then going into labor, feeling rested and ready, not exhausted. Having a toddler at the time, just already being a mom of one during the time, I just wanted to have starting from a place of rest and not one of those days where you're like, I am so stressed, I cannot imagine going to labor right now. I also just wanted to feel loved and supported by everyone at the birth, for my midwife to trust my body and the birthing process, just to be fully surrendered to God and have a heart of trust and not a fear. So then 2 weeks later, I actually wrote out this birth narrative. Basically, I just wrote out and visualized what my dream birth would look like. Literally, so much of it happened. And I don't believe that's because I spoke it into existence or something, but I just know that I had these ideas of what I desired and I gave them to God and said, basically, do whatever you want with these. This is my heart. And I just felt so loved. So my story literally to the day happened. In my birth narrative I said, it's Friday. My family and I went to go to the local zoo. We ate something nourishing that afternoon, came home. Labor had kind of started by then. We were just getting the house ready. We decided to have my daughter go with somebody for the night. Yeah, I basically wrote out all these details, and sure enough, they pretty much happened almost exactly. And I just feel like that's such a cool testament to what God did in my birth, and also just what it's like to surrender it to Him. So to jump into the actual birth story, the week leading up to her birth at 38 weeks, I had started to notice some changes happening. I had noticed that she had dropped lower in my pelvis when I was doing hip circles on the ball. I also just want to say that a big theme in this labor is that I did not have to strive. I got to rest and trust in the goodness of the Lord, and that was enough for me. With that, during my first baby, I had done all of the do these things to help induce labor, eat 4 to 6 dates a day, after your full term, and drink red raspberry leaf tea, lots of it. And while I believe those things are super great and helpful for your body, I just did not do those this time. I think I was just so busy and distracted. I bought dates and I ate some of them, but I wasn't religious about it. And I also drank a few glasses of the red raspberry leaf tea here and there, but again, it was just not striving. It was okay, I'll have a glass of tea this afternoon. So I just thought it was so cool to note that I had done some of the hip circles too, and that none of these things are what brought about labor on my own willpower. So throughout week 38, I noticed an uptick of losing my mucus plug. I think that week 38, I also noticed I was finally having some Braxton Hicks contractions, and I was just feeling a little bit more emotional than usual. Then that Friday that I had been praying for rolled around. One of my desires with this labor too was to labor on Sabbath. One of my prayers was that I would get to go into labor Friday night because we celebrate and recognize a Friday to Saturday Sabbath, just as our family's rest day together. And so one of the things that I thought would be so beautiful to pray for is that I would get to labor on Sabbath, but it not be weary or burdensome. Literally getting to go into labor, but it wasn't a burden. like I had heard so many people try to tell me that birth is. So in faith, we did cancel our regularly scheduled date night. We cleaned and prepared our home for Sabbath and for birth. That morning started with a yummy breakfast of French toast and maple syrup. In my birth narrative, I had talked about the temperature being warm and sunny, and it was a warm and toasty day, 96 degrees. But we told our daughter that we would take her to the zoo that afternoon, and so we did. It was a really fun time, just a family time together. We watched the little alligator show and just enjoyed what we kind of knew would be these like last moments of just our little family of 3, the way it was before she came out. Afterwards, we stopped by Walmart to buy some nectarines and some strawberries and the other things we needed to make chicken tacos for dinner. This was also something I had talked about in my birth narrative. I wanted to have refreshing, nourishing fruits and vegetables and just this like really nourishing meal to send my body into labor well. When we got home, we had our daughter have some quiet time in her room while my husband and I spent time together. I think it was around 3 p.m. or so when I had let him know that I would like some alone time to do the miles circuit. So my husband and daughter were making tacos while I was in the bedroom doing the miles circuit and listening to a birth story. Once I got to the last position of the 3, which is asymmetrical movements, so I was doing side step-ups on a step stool, I had started to feel real contractions. These started around 5:30 to 6 p.m. I noticed they were different than the Braxton Hicks I had been experiencing the past week. They were still pretty sporadic though, so I did ignore them, as this time the theme also of my labor was to ignore it as long as possible. Because of how long my first labor went, I just didn't want to be timing contractions and super focused on the timing of everything. So after the circuit, I went upstairs to eat dinner and finish up chores with my husband and daughter. The day had started to cool down as there was a big storm that had started to form, which I love thunderstorms. I vacuumed upstairs while my husband worked on dishes. And as we were doing all these things, early labor definitely started to set in, and I was ecstatic. I did a few dishes as well. I would have a surge come on. I would take some deep breaths, sway my hips, breathe through it, and then continue on. We prayed and enjoyed our tacos, and by that time, my husband and I were throwing around the idea of having our daughter stay with the grandparents that night, since it did seem like labor was setting in. Even though we were in denial, we again had been praying for this. And so we decided to call my mom and dad and see if they wanted to have her for the night. Funny, because as we were eating tacos, I just would get these surges and I would stand up from the chair, do a little sway, take a deep breath, and then I would just go back to eating my tacos like normal. Prior to that, I also got to take a shower before labor had started, which was nice, and my husband brushed my hair and I put it in braids, which is how I wanted it for my labor. So back to present, as I was finishing dinner, surges kept coming on and I just kept working through them. I still wasn't timing them. Again, I was trying to ignore it as long as possible. So yeah, we did decide to have my parents come pick up our daughter. We contacted them about 7:30 p.m. During that time, we packed her overnight bag, and again, I would just have a few surges here or there coming on, again, ignoring them. And it was about 8:30 p.m. that they showed up to our house. And my husband called my mom to ask them to babysit for the evening. I did text my midwife a heads up, just letting her know that I had been experiencing some early labor, and so just to be like aware. Once my parents came, we invited them in and we all talked for a little while. My surges by that point were coming very consistently, especially since I was up and active and trying to prepare the house to just be clean for Sabbath and for birth. I thought it was so cool because while my parents were here, I was still getting contractions, but while we were all talking, but I would just stop and gently breathe and maybe sway a little bit. But I felt inwardly proud because I really don't think they noticed when I was having contractions. And it's funny because my dad has made a few comments about like what his views on birth is, and he came from a place of like not understanding it to be as peaceful as it can be. And so I just felt proud that like I was probably having these, like I was having these contractions, and that they probably were not even aware that I was like coping through these contractions, and it was just like not even noticeable. Like I was still going on with my daily life. While they were there, we also went outside and were just standing in the cool evening. We were showing them our garden and talking about the road that they were tearing up behind our house at the time, watching the sunset. It's funny because I was also cleaning up yard chairs, like lawn chairs, and a table that we had, like a folding table outside in between contractions. Just that last instinct of like, I need to clean and tidy things. And I definitely could have asked somebody, but I just, again, kind of felt like that superwoman complex, like, oh, I'm cleaning up big chairs in the middle of contractions. After that, my dad was helping my husband clean out the gutter because it had been flooding during our recent rainstorms. And so my mom and I and my daughter were inside, and I was still just gently breathing and coping through the contractions, just really peacefully and calm. We finally then said our goodbyes and we sent them away. By the time that they had taken off, it was probably about already 9:30 or so. The sun had just finished setting. I looked around the house to see what else needed to be done. I had finished doing some folding / putting away laundry because we needed the washer and dryer to be available for the towels that the midwives like to warm up for you during the birth. Around 10, we decided to go to bed, just wanting again to get rest. Not quite knowing what was going to happen with my labor, we knew it would be good to rest in the evening. Sabbath had officially begun, and I had felt the Lord's peace and presence as I had snuggled into bed. I did decide to time contractions at this point just to see where I was at so I could let my midwife know. It was at that point that my husband was reading his Bible and had decided to, kind of randomly, but not, open to Matthew 11:28-30. Which was so cool because he had no idea what my previous prayers were, which was that I would get to labor in the Lord's rest. Yeah, because that verse says, "Come to me all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. For I am gentle and lowly at heart. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." I might be paraphrasing a little bit. Yeah, I just wanted that over my labor. I just wanted his easy yoke, his rest, his gentleness to just be with me and present. So it was just so cool for my husband to open to that verse at the beginning of my labor to encourage me with, having no idea that those were the things I was desiring and praying over my labor. After timing for an hour, I found out my contractions were coming every 6 to 8 minutes, lasting for about a minute. At that point, I updated my midwife, and it was around 10:30 p.m., and she said she would be ready to go. As far as working through the surges, I would breathe and I would tell myself, my mind is calm, my body is soft. Or this power brings me one step closer to meeting my baby. Or I'd say it is good, relax, open, surrender. I had started making more vocal noises, and that is when my husband started breathing with me, which was really helpful to help me remember to stay in those deep, long breaths, breathing in for 4 and out for 8. Having him breathe with me helped me to actually co-regulate with him and relax my body for labor. By this time, we had kind of figured that we wouldn't be sleeping, and so my husband had gotten up and prepared the birth pool for when it was really time. It was probably around 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. when I was side lying in the bed like I had laid on my side when I slept at night during pregnancy, and I was just having most of my surges there, which was just so cool for me because, again, I had prayed this labor that I would not have to be so active, that it could be restful, because my last labor was so active and I just had felt a lot more exhausted this pregnancy too, and just tired. Like I couldn't do all the workouts. I couldn't be the super like fit, energetic mom. I was just tired. And so I had prayed for rest during this labor. And so it was so cool. The whole thing, to jump ahead a little bit, was so restful. I basically only labored in this position of side lying on the bed and then in the pool. So my husband would apply pressure to my sacrum whenever I would get a contraction. And I think it's worth saying that I was actually, even though we had known we needed to get things ready for the birth, the labor was so restful that I was sleeping in between contractions during this point, which is so cool, because looking back now, knowing I was in active labor, I was just sleeping, resting, and laboring in the rest of the Lord. It was around 1:30 in the morning that I had woken up to go to the bathroom, and that is when I had lost the rest of my mucus plug and had a little bloody show. But even after that, I went back to bed again and was just laying in bed. The room was dark and it felt like I was sleeping, even though I would wake up to have the contraction. Besides that, I was like still sleeping through the night. My husband continued to help me regulate my breathing, just breathing with me deeply. And I just kept repeating those affirmations in my head that encouraged me and reminded me to relax my body and to just, know that I was safe. It was during one intense contraction that my water actually popped in bed at around 2:30 in the morning. Thankfully, we had put down all of the pads and stuff already. So my husband helped me like pull that all up and like make my way to the shower when that happened to get everything kind of cleaned up. Which was so cool to experience that, because again, during my first labor, they had artificially ruptured the amniotic sac. So to experience naturally my water popping was like, whoa. It was at that time that I went to the shower that my husband did decide to call the midwife for me and let her know what was happening. And she said she was on her way. I, at this point, was still oblivious though, like, oh, we probably got a long time to go. And it was funny because we did not. At that point, 2:30 in the morning, I only had like 3 to 4 hours to go. So yeah, she said she was on her way. I was having some pretty intense contractions in the shower, but it was so cool. At no point in the labor did I feel scared or panicked or concerned that things were getting out of control. I was steady and I felt guided by the Lord, getting just what I could handle in His strength in the moment. After getting out of the shower, I did throw up in a trash can in our bedroom. I thought, oh, this might be a transition, but I also didn't want to get my hopes up. So denial was my favorite labor game to play. My midwife and the birth assistant arrived a little after 3 in the morning. They set up all their supplies and quietly listened to my baby's heartbeat with the Doppler. Right before they arrived, actually, my husband had started filling the birth pool. So when they got there, they were also checking the temp and making sure it was just all ready for me to get in. Again, I just felt so happy to have my husband there, just applying that pressure and comfort and getting to labor in bed and not having the whole thing just be this one long workout. It was at 4 a.m. that I got into the birth pool. The water felt amazing and I just kept relaxing further and further into the contractions. I had sat in the water and I just had sat with my back against the pool with my legs crossed. My husband was behind me, just on our bed, and he was just gently massaging my back and neck, and again, just encouraging me and providing comfort. I felt so loved and so at peace. I was still falling asleep between contractions. I was just in this like whole other zone of relaxation and trust and comfort in my labor. Whenever a surge would come on in the birth pool, I would pause, lean forward on my hands, still with my legs crossed in front of me, and just breathe deeply while my husband applied pressure to my back. And then after the surge was over, I would sit back again on my bottom and just relax in the pool. I labored for about 45 minutes like that, when intuitively I had kind of just felt like I should change positions, like that one wasn't working anymore, which was so cool. So I had flipped over the side of the pool and just kind of let my arms like drape over the side of the pool and resting my face against the edge of the, or on the edge of the pool, with my legs out behind me, just kind of in an open position for pushing. At this point, I was definitely vocalizing through my contractions, but I was still keeping in that low voice, relaxed mouth and jaw, just breathing into my labor and vocalizing with the contractions. And I had about 3 contractions in that position, but it was probably around 5 a.m. that after those 3 contractions, my low groans had turned into grunts, apparently. And my midwives, they were so kind because, well, my midwife and her birth assistant I met, they were so kind because I had requested that I not be watched, that I was just more comfortable not being watched while I was laboring. And so they were actually just sitting in my hallway while I was in my bedroom in the birth pool, giving me my space and privacy. But at that point, they had been like, "Are you feeling like pushing?" So they had came in, and at that point, obviously, I was fine with that. They were getting everything set up and ready, and I was, yeah, I still didn't think I was there, but I was just so in the labor zone, I didn't quite know what was happening. My body definitely started to bear down though. I remember praying during that time that God would give me just enough rest in between the contractions to recuperate and then be ready to start again. And He definitely did that. This labor also was not textbook, in that I just had nice long gaps in between contractions, which, usually a textbook labor, your contractions start far apart and then they start to come closer and closer, and that during pushing they're, most intense, very close to get your baby out. But I love actually in that safe place where I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong and my body wasn't broken, that this is just the way my body labors. It felt so nice and such a blessing to have like a 4 to 5 minute rest in between pushing contractions. And I also felt really happy for myself that I was able to just continue vocalizing low moans and groans instead of screaming. During my first labor, I did scream a little bit at the end because I just felt like it was more power leaving and I was just trying to put everything I had into it. I wasn't like in pain or afraid. It was just like during pushing, I was like, oh, I just want to, it was just my last little attempt to get anything more out I could. But yeah, I just felt so peaceful. Again, no striving. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to like try to give it that little extra. It just worked peacefully out where my body was doing what it knew how to do. So the first push, I started crowning and her head only partially came out. Apparently I had said, "Oh my gosh, I remember what that feels like." But I had tried not to push past my surge, really wanting my tissues to stretch this time. The second contraction came and I had pushed with a surge and birthed her head fully. And then I waited. And finally, when my third contraction came on, I had finished birthing her body in that last push, which was kind of wild because I felt her shoulders wiggle their way down through my birth canal. I had actually thought like somebody was maybe like pulling on her, but nobody was touching her. She was just like wiggling as she came down through my birth canal. So my midwife helped me catch her as I pushed her out and helped guide her up through my arms, and I pulled her up out of the water, just so happy, realizing that my sweet baby was finally here. She was born at 5:26 in the morning. Funny enough, right before labor had started, I had envisioned having her by around 5:30 in the morning. I held her with such love and exhaustion, just so grateful that she was in my arms. 15 minutes later, I birthed the placenta while we were still sitting in the pool. She was healthy and doing great. After about another 15 minutes, my husband cut the cord and we moved into bed. Once in bed, we snuggled and breastfed for a little bit. She actually did need help clearing her airways. She, while breastfeeding at first, had actually aspirated on a little bit of breast milk, but my midwife handled that so calmly. It didn't feel like an emergency. She just handled it with such care and urgency, but not fear. And that was cool because she had actually offered us some medicine that could help clear her lungs, like a homeopathic medicine. But we said sure. But while she was actually preparing it, my husband prayed, and her breathing actually started returning to normal. And so, because they were constantly monitoring her respirations and such. And so it was cool, before she actually even administered the medicine, her breathing had just leveled out and was doing great. So yeah, that's basically how the rest of the morning went. They cleaned everything up for me, and I think they were out of the house by 8 to 9 in the morning. It was just such a beautiful experience. I was so happy the way everything had gone. It was so restful, and I felt so much more peace and so much deeper relaxation than I even did with my first labor, which was a calm labor and birth. But it was just so beautiful to see what my body was capable of. And it was so encouraging too to have such good midwifery care that she trusted my body, and she also trusted the Lord and the way that He designed our bodies to birth. And so I didn't have any loss of autonomy. All the decisions I made were my own, and it just went so smoothly. So yeah, after that, we had my daughter come home a little later in the afternoon, and she got to meet her little sissy. And that was so sweet, those first bonding moments. But yeah, that was my birth story with my second daughter. It's a story I love to share because it was just so nothing really I could have done. I mean, I had done some things to prepare my mind and my heart, but I just saw God's goodness to me in it all. And it was just so encouraging to have such a beautiful birth where He saw the desires of my heart and gave them to me like a good father would. I hope that birth story encouraged and inspired you, especially if you're preparing to give birth soon. I don't know where you're at spiritually, but I can say that the Lord is so good, and He is just such a friend and such a loving, good Father. And if that's not the version of Him you've heard before, I'm sorry. But yeah, I would encourage you to maybe re-explore trusting Him again if you haven't before. And if you do, yeah, believe that He can do amazing things, even down to the specific little requests. I had a beautiful birth, and I don't think it was because of any specific little life hack I did. The Lord was gracious to me, and the birth was beautiful, and it's a story I love to share, and hope inspires you as you just prepare your heart and mind for birth, because I feel like more than preparing your body physically, which is helpful, and learning how birth goes, I feel like preparing your emotional and spiritual and your soul for birth, it's even deeper work. So Anyways, if you've stayed with me this long, thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. I hope you join me for future videos. If this content is helpful to you, I would really appreciate if you like this video, and I would also love if you subscribe to my channel. I will be making more intentional living videos in the future. So thanks again. I hope you have a great week. Bye.